As I said when I visited Newtown just over 3 months ago, if there is a step we can take that will save just one child, just one parent, just another town from experiencing the same grief that some of the moms and dads who are here have endured, then we should be doing it.
That was the president at the White House today with families victimized by gun violence around the country, including parents of some of the children massacred at Sandy Hook in Newtown, Connecticut. In Newtown today, residents protested outside of the National Shooting Sports Foundation, which is one of the largest gun lobbies in the country. It happens to be headquartered in Newtown, just 3 miles away from Sandy Hook Elementary School. Joining me now for an exclusive interview, one of today's protesters, Susan Ludwig, the mother of 2 children who were at Sandy Hook Elementary School the day of the shooting. Susan, thank you for joining us tonight. I just want to make clear to the audience, your children survived that day. Tell us what it was like when you arrived at the school and saw children being carried out with bullet wounds.
Yeah, that's correct. I have 4 children, and 2 of my kids were at Sandy Hook that day. One is 6, and she's in 1st grade, and one is 7, and she's in 2nd grade. And the day on December 14th, I was headed into school I was supposed to be making gingerbread houses at my daughter's, in my daughter's 1st grade class. But on the way to school, about a half a mile from the school, I saw another parent from the class in the middle of the road, and she was with 4 of those boys that escaped. And she said to me, "Something's really wrong. These boys are saying somebody's trying to kill them." So I rushed over to the school and I parked my car there and I started to go inside, and there were a couple of police cars there at the time, and they wouldn't let me in the school, so I stayed in that parking lot and I waited for things to happen. As I waited, more and more police cars came and with rifles and whatnot. And as I waited, finally one of the police officers came out, and he was carrying one of my daughter's Daisy friends in his arms, and she had long brown hair, just like my daughter's, and I had to look very hard to make sure it wasn't my daughter, but it wasn't. But she had a gunshot wound to her head and blood all over her midriff, and he held her there until he could get her to an ambulance. And I waited, and at that point I thought, maybe this is just a crazy parent. And then the second child came out, and she was the sole survivor from the other class, and she was absolutely head to toe covered in blood and flesh, just hanging on her whole body. And her mother was in that parking lot that day, luckily. But when I saw her, I knew that it wasn't just a shooting, it had been a massacre. And so then I started to wait, and I waited, and I watched until I just sat there begging God that my kids please be safe. And finally my kids did come out, and they walked down to the firehouse where we met with other parents. But there were many parents that day that couldn't find their children, and my heart breaks for them. They lived every parent's worst nightmare.
Susan, what did the children who walked out that day experience as they were walking out of their school building?
They were terrified. Some of those children had to walk past their principal, Dawn Hochsprung, dead on the floor in her own blood. Some of my children, I'm happy to say, luckily enough, came out the back door, and so they could hear the gunshots and the screaming over the intercoms, but my children did not have to see any of the gore. They just knew that it had happened.
Susan, I wanted you to bring us back to that day as a preamble, actually, to what we're going to listen to the president say right now, something else that he had to say at the White House today.
Okay.
The notion that 2 months or 3 months after something as horrific as what happened in Newtown happens, and we've moved on to other things, that's not who we are.
Susan, it seems that the NRA and others are counting on that being who we are, that we have just moved on, that a couple of months is enough.
The NRA likes to call us the Connecticut effect, and I could tell you that as a mother who has had her children almost murdered, who has had to sit back and watch while 20 of their friends and 6 of their teachers were murdered, I've had to watch as my children's sense of safety and innocence has been stripped from them. let alone their what's going to happen to them mentally. I can tell you that my feelings and the feelings of this country have not changed and will not change.
And Susan, you made a point. You made a point in something that you wrote about this, that if the old assault weapons ban had been in place, Adam Lanza would not have had that gun. Expand on that, please.
If that weapon had been in place, he wouldn't have had that gun. But what happened instead, what happened 22 decades ago, was that the assault weapons ban was left to expire. And they had started at that time, the CDC had started researching on ways to prevent gun violence. And what happened instead was that the NRA and the NSSF got a hold of some of our elected officials, and they were able to get them to stop trying to find out ways to get information to prevent gun violence while we weren't looking. While we weren't paying attention, they changed the laws. They let these things expire. I'm gonna mess up.
Susan, the president made the point today that if we could save one life, if we could spare one family, if we can spare one town from going through this, then it's worth it. The NRA and the organization up there in Connecticut where you live that opposes any kind of restrictions on guns, they always make the argument, well, hey, this won't solve the problem. This won't end the possibility of people going into a school and shooting children. But if we did limit the magazines and the capacity, and if that limit had still been in place, more children would be alive at Sandy Hook Elementary today.
I mean, I absolutely agree. If there weren't assault weapons, the NRA likes to use the excuse that people will hurt people whether they have a gun or not. And even at the hearing that I went to in Hartford, they said if they don't have a gun, they'll use something like a hammer. And my reply to them is, I've never seen 26 people die by hammer before.
Susan Ludwig, thank you very much for joining us tonight, and thank you for sharing with us what you've had to go through there.
Okay, thank you.